We also use image often to teach history, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And I think it goes right along with this idea of empathy. Image evokes a certain emotion in us. So a teacher in a middle school or a high school class might show a painting or a photograph that depicts a historical event, or for more recent events might even show a brief video clip that shows actual footage of the event. But often, images from the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement are violent and graphic. So how graphic should we be? How do we teach things like the Jim Crow era, the lynchings, or even the Ku Klux Klan to children? What images can we and should we show to children?
I think that the first point there, I think it's a great question. The first point is that we should never avoid talking about slavery and historical injustice in the United States because we're afraid of traumatizing children, in the sense that we really can't teach about American history without teaching about slavery and without teaching about other historical injustice. You just can't do it. So I think that's the first point, is that we shouldn't excise those topics simply because they involve difficult issues for students to process. That said, I think at the younger grades, it may be more important to prepare students in terms of their knowledge and understanding verbally and in writing and in other ways, conversation about the context of this topic and these issues and what happened in American history, and to introduce graphic imagery as students get older, when they have that background of knowledge to understand, to appropriately process what they're seeing. Rather than to just be shocked. I think that it's important to awaken the sort of conscience and moral sense through imagery, but that it's also important that one be prepared to process it appropriately. So for that reason, I think that you talk about all of the injustices in American history as early as you're talking about American history with students and reading about it and discussing it, but you don't necessarily introduce graphic imagery until students are a little bit older, would be my recommendation. But
I mean, I agree mostly with what Adam said. I understand, I know that those images are stunning and startling and depressing and so painful, right? And this is where we really start understanding how difficult our jobs are as educators, right? Because we know that we're not educating tables or chairs. We're educating human beings who have their own backgrounds and their own family histories. And so my answer is going to be a little bit complicated because I understand what Adam is saying and I agree, but I think there are two things here, right? I think one is that we've come far in this country, but we haven't come far enough. We know this. And so the question I always have is why? Why aren't people more moved? Why does it take a public killing or murder of a black man or a black woman for us to say, okay, we need to do something, And the answer I always come back to is that people are not moved because they're not close enough to the problem. George Floyd was a moment because we all watched it. We were all in quarantine, we weren't distracted, and we were watching it. That was an image. It was an image on television that people saw 4 minutes long, right? Or however long it was. And suddenly the society was moved. So how do we get moved? We don't get moved by long lectures or long books. We get moved by things short things that we hear, short things, and that's why Twitter is such, or Snapchat and so on, are so brilliant, because they move people to do things or to think in a certain way. Brilliant, but problematic, of course, right? On the other side, though, myself personally, I find it very difficult to watch films about slavery, to see images of lynchings, because I look up on that tree and I see someone that looks like my husband, or someone that could be my brother, my great great uncle, someone that is from my family line. So I can imagine a kid in a class like that being subjected, like you want the kids to all see it, because maybe they're moved in ways that we haven't moved the society in the past. But at the same time, we know that those images are going to deeply hurt a certain group of students in our class. So what do we do with that? It's none of these answers are like clear-cut right and wrong. And this is why your work in pedagogy is so important to any school district, Tammy, because you really have to think through all these angles, think about who these students are in your class, and think about what is the impact at the end of the day that we're trying to get to. So yes, an image of a lynching is too much for a kid, but it's always been too much for a kid. So is there a middle ground? Is there a way that we can start introducing these things, introduced properly and with a lot of preparation, so that the trigger that's coming is not debilitating? I think kids in our classrooms now are different from kids, and I can see it in the college class. In the college class, kids who are coming into our college class now have a deeper understanding of race in America than when I started teaching 20 years ago, right? So I think that we have to factor all of that in and consider where we want to go with what we're presenting.
I think what Stephanie said is very important, and I think that the two things that you described, on the one hand, we have to have knowledge, right, of what we're seeing, of the context, the history, but then we also have to be moved to act. And I think it's very important to see those two as different things, and that as things that need to go together to move our society forward in the way we think it should be moved. And of course, our students are the people who are going to be affecting society in the future, and we're preparing them for that. And so, yeah, however that comes down in terms of precise guidelines from the standpoint of pedagogy, I think that the way Stephanie put it is exactly right, that it's important to know what's right and to know what's correct and accurate and true about history, and about ourselves. And then it's important after that to be moved to act on it, because too often we have knowledge without being moved to act. And if we are moved to act without knowledge, that can be a problem as well. So I just think that's really important.
So let's say the teacher's looking at the picture and wonders, is this appropriate? Is there a question that one can ask? Could I say to the teacher, ask yourself this question in order to determine if this is going to move in the right way?
I think that something Stephanie mentioned about the composition of the classroom might be a consideration when you're looking at that as well. I mean, who are the students in my class, and what is their background and their identities and their ancestry and families? How will they process this, right? Because different students will process it differently on that basis. So I think that's an important question that teachers, good teachers will know. They know how individual students might react to these things. And then I think, secondly, to ask themselves, what have they learned in the classroom and maybe in previous years that will connect with what they're seeing? And have they learned enough to contextualize and process what they're seeing?
Agreed. I've been thinking about this question a lot, particularly when we think about there's some music out there that maybe is too hard. For example, there's a song by Billie Holiday called Strange Fruit, which is very graphic. But the way Billie Holiday sings it, it's sort of, it gently brings you in. It gently introduces the history of lynching in the South. She's got a beautiful voice. Her articulation, the musicality of Billie Holiday allows that to land on ears gently, you know. It's only when she gets to the very last, the last phrase really, that becomes a little bit harsher, you know. Other people have covered that song, and it's certainly a lot, you know, it goes hard the whole time. But Billie Holiday does it in a way that pulls people in. So I bring that up because I've been thinking a lot about images. I have a colleague who he studies images of lynchings. You know, he's a white man, and he does exhibits of, you know, of these images, which are very hard for me to look at, you know, but they're important. But I know that it's hard for a lot of people. I wonder if, for example, a teacher looks at an image, is there a way to bring the Billie Holiday to it, right? Like, is there a way to bring a silhouette of the image, you know, so that you're not, especially kids who are younger, that they see a tree, they see an image of a human being on the tree. It's important, but they don't see sort of the graphic images. I think it's also important to zoom out and see the people who are watching this. You know, too often we see just the tree and the body. But do we zoom out and see that families are there with children picnicking at these events? That's a tough thing too. But that's part of the truth, right? That's part of the history. And we often don't look at what's in the background. It stuns me that families would take their children to watch this, you know, that kids would be playing jump rope while that is happening. But this is the truth of what it was. History is interesting because we like to sort of pick and choose what we want to share, what we want to present to our students. So I would say certainly zoom out, show the full picture, but also maybe there's a way to bring some kind of silhouetting or something in that sort of allows a gentle landing. We want it to land. We want it to land well, but we also don't want to completely switch it off. You know, I always say that if we run too fast, the train is just going to go off the tracks and we're not going anywhere. And that's one of the things that Adam and I really think through as we think about race and the American story, is that we want the train moving in the direction. I know there are lots of my colleagues who would like us to go much faster, right? But I don't want to get that train off the tracks. I just want us to steadily but deliberately move forward.